Welcome, everyone, to another episode of On the Way Home. I am Michael Braithwaite, your host, and I am from Blue Door, the good folks who produce this podcast. Listen, Blue Door's been around, operating for 42 years in York Region, Durham Region, and Peel Region, primarily in the areas of affordable housing and homelessness, health related to homelessness. And we recently have started a social, well, I said too recently, with 4 years, social enterprise called Construct that launches people into the trades to build the housing we desperately need, because we need tradespeople as well. We're a full-scale construction company that, like any other construction contractor, does great work at a fair price. But hey, there's a social return, because every time you hire Construct, we launch a bunch of people into the trades because they get some work experience that you don't pay for. That and much, much more. Check out bluedoor.ca. Let's talk about today's guest. We have Ian from Nidus3D, and it's a great conversation um, around technology and its place in ending and preventing homelessness. And Ian talks about, in our conversation, he was working in the province of Ontario on the political side of things, and really just saw that policy, although it plays a very important part in ending homelessness, we say that all the time on the show, that bad policy created homelessness, only good policy will take us out. But aside from that, how do we speed things up? How do we do things differently? He took to heart that saying, if it's going to be, it's up to me. I took a step forward, lined up with some brilliant folks in the construction end of things who thought about this 3D technology. Went to Denmark, I believe, and checked out some of their machines there, brought it back to Canada. And we talk all about that process. We talk about why technology, why does it matter? What are the benefits to this? And he talks about how it speeds things up. There's which, of course, there's cost savings, there's fewer, there's a smaller margin for error with a 3D printer. You have fewer people on the work site, you have way less waste. And we talk about some of the projects they've done already. One house in Leamington that they partnered with Habitat for Humanity there on, some work they're doing with an Indigenous community in Calgary right now, how this technology is taking off, his hopes for the future, and much, much more. Listen, this is a really important podcast, I think, because we need all hands on deck. We need innovators. And Ian and Nidus3D, they are innovators, and this is the future of construction. How we're going to speed it up. These buildings are also built to last. I mean, it's concrete, right? And they can actually make the pocket where you put insulation as big as you want, so they can insulate to really make it affordable with heating and cooling. And of course, your ongoing capital. If you build something and 30 years from now it's falling apart, I mean, so many of us get in trouble that way, housing providers, because we don't have the money to do those massive repairs. These buildings really will save you. 3D printed buildings are meant to last and have, a little less maintenance in the future. A great conversation about important technology, the role technology plays, how 3D printing is going to help us build more housing and faster housing and more affordable housing in the future. A great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Let's go to that now. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, listen, this podcast is not in 3D, but what we're going to talk about today is all about 3D. Before we get to that, we have to ask the question we ask every guest, because the answer is very personal, and that is, what does home mean to you?
Oh, wow. I think home means family for the most part to me. I think I grew up in a very close-knit family on a farm, and when I think of home, it's the proximity of my siblings and my parents, and yeah.
Beautiful answer. And I think, like most people, you do not mention the four walls and a roof. It is really, people talk about safety, security, but they also talk about family. And very much the Indigenous definition of homelessness talks about it's very relational,
Yeah.
right? Like relationship to land and family, etc.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Let's talk about, before we get into talking about Nidus3D, maybe you could take us on a little bit of a journey of how you arrived, your kind of journey into the work you're doing now.
Yeah, for sure. So my job previous to this, I was actually a provincial politician, um, representing Kingston and the islands in the Ontario legislature, and we did a lot of work around housing and the lack of housing supply and affordability. And it really became obvious very quickly to me that the levers that are available from a policy perspective weren't going to move the needle on housing supply in the way that we need in Canada right now. The crisis is so acute that we need a dramatic transformation, not just from a policy side. There's stuff you can do there for sure. I'm not discounting the role that government has in accelerating supply, but that we needed a kind of more transformational change in how we actually put up buildings. That the process we use for construction has become too complicated and too expensive, and we need to kind of go back to the drawing board and figure out how to get these things out of the ground in a way that is fast, efficient, and affordable. And I think we're at a time in history where technology is going to allow us to achieve that in a way that was never an option before.
Absolutely agree. And so let's talk about Nidus 3D. You took the,
Sure.
the saying, if it's going to be, it's up to me. You're talking about, hey, here's what I learned.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. And you tell me about Nidus 3D. How did that come about? And what do you do?
So there's three founders of Nidus, myself and originally another fellow named Hugh, and it's a story of I was lamenting the state of the housing sector. I'd been paying attention to 3D construction printing for a little while. I felt like the technology had gone to a place where it was viable to be deployed, and we had a mutual friend. Hugh and I had a mutual friend, and I was talking to him about this, and he said, "You got to go talk to this guy, Hugh. You keep saying the same side, like the same thing to me from two different sides. Hugh's in construction, I was in policy." He's like, "You're both stressing the same points. You're both lamenting the same problems. You two should connect." And he showed up on my doorstep actually like a day later and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, I was told to come talk to you about this." And we talked about housing for 4 hours and what we thought we could do, and we looked at the technology. We started vetting different 3D printers that were available, ended up choosing a group based out of Denmark, flew over and met with them, looked at the equipment in action, and really felt that it was at a place where we could form a business around it, introduce it to the Canadian market, and actually build out a business using this new technology.
Now, for people who don't understand, so 3D printing, I
Yeah,
mean, because I think they 3D print a house.
yeah.
They've seen small 3D printers maybe,
Yeah.
and what they've done. How does the process really work
So
in broad strokes?
yeah, it's honestly remarkably similar. And so if you can picture a kind of desktop 3D printer, which has been around for long enough now that I think most folks do know what it looks like, scale the size of that little gantry system up to the size of a house and change the material that's being extruded. So we work with a structural concrete in terms of the material we're building with, but it is placed in a nearly identical manner, layer by layer of material being placed. It hardens kind of as we print. There's a bit of a timing issue there where we want to make sure we're getting good adhesion between the wet layers, but where it's hardening fast enough to support the entirety of the build as we print. So we place it layer by layer. When we're done printing the walls, the printer moves on to the next site, and the rest of the folks come in, and the rest of the build is still done traditionally. Although we certainly aspire to start touching on more build scopes and continuing the transformation of the building sector.
What are some of the advantages around 3D printing? Why would someone want to use this technology?
So there's kind of two parts of it. One is in addressing a series of issues that the construction sector is facing right now. We have an incredibly significant labor shortfall for skilled tradespeople in all across Canada and Ontario and all across Canada. Um, so, and that's only going to get worse. So we have an acute labor problem. We have a lot of volatility in the cost of materials. We experienced that during COVID with the skyrocketing price of lumber. That's got to come back down again, but right as we solved that problem, inflation kicked in and interest rates changed, and so we've added another new stress onto the housing sector. And so the 3D printing, it requires less people. It's very quick to deliver, so the cost of borrowing for construction is going to decrease, and it's using a material that is relatively price stable compared to what else is out there. So we have a huge amount of predictability in terms of the quality of the product that's delivered, the speed at which we can deliver it with, and the cost that we can deliver it with. And you add all of that together, and it's a pretty competitive or compelling story for using technology in this way to address the housing shortfall.
I love all of that. I visited one of your projects in Kingston, and Hugh,
Yeah.
your partner, he pointed to the smallest pile and said, "That's our waste from this house," and it
Yes.
was next
Yeah.
to nothing, right? In a traditional construction, what we call stick build, a lot more waste. Is that true? You're saving a lot of materials
Yeah.
there as well, right?
There's very little waste. We're really only using the nearly exact amount of material that's going into the house. We can we use an on-site mixing plant, and so we're really only producing and mixing as much material as we're going to place on any given day. So yeah, very little waste.
Yeah, and so people understand it's a program you're plugging in where things go, electrical, plumbing wise, window wise, and the machine just works around it. I think Hugh told me you basically got three people. You've got a couple of runners, you've got someone
Mm-hmm.
operating the machine, and yeah, it's just an incredible process. And the machine itself is pretty impressive. What has the reception been in the Canadian market to this technology?
It's been fantastic. We thought that there was going to be a lot more in terms of challenges in introducing this new technology, but some of them we were able to address with our own sort of process on how we've approached construction. We do use a structural concrete. It fits within the specs of standard CSA approved mix designs. We're placing it in a manner that fits underneath the masonry building code. There's now international standards, ASTM ISO standards for additive manufacturing and construction, which came out in January. So that's helped on that side of things. And then there's just the sort of acknowledgement of the desperate need for housing. And so when we're bringing something to the table that has so much transformational potential to it, folks are listening. I think it's the right time to look at these sort of alternative means of construction. Um, we've had a ton of support from every level of government, from other groups in the private sector, developers who are interested in this as we kind of scale it up to a place where it would actually be able to deliver the quantity of units that they would need to kind of move into this space. So it's been really positive.
I wonder too if there's a space for it. Just um, a few months back, our housing minister talked about kind of a playbook. Here's a bunch of houses that would be pre-designed, ready to go. So, in an
Yes.
effort to speed up the development of housing, is there? You think there's a spot for 3D printing in that to say, here's three that we can do and do it quick?
We hope so. When we heard that announcement, we were thrilled because it is exactly what this technology is good at. We can produce uh, a set of digital designs and push them out to printers in almost any location. And because it's an automated process, there's going to be no sort of variation in the product that's being delivered on any of those sites. And so to use the technology in that way, to have pre-approved designs that we know we're allowed to deploy, it's exactly what we're looking for with this technology. So um, we want to see that announcement kind of put into action and understand how it's going to apply in a practical sense. But we certainly anticipate being able to fit well within that model.
Amazing. Now, what are the so we were looking at this for one of our projects, and we had a consultant, and of course, it's all about risk. And they were talking to me and said, one of the risks is they were saying it's great that there's only a few people doing this. The challenge is there's only a few people doing it. So one of the
Yeah.
things they were nervous about, they said, what if halfway through something happens, the equipment breaks or whatever with a traditional stick build? Got a ton of people that can step in, right? That are doing that. Not so many here, like with the technology. What are your thoughts around a workaround on that?
Well, we certainly need more people in the space, and we've said this from the beginning. If we're the only group pushing this in Canada, that's a long and costly deployment of the technology for one small startup to do. And so, we do want to see more people moving into the space, and we're happy to talk to folks who are interested in it for sure. In terms of just the interruption and workflow, the equipment is very robust. You're right; things could happen, cause some delays for sure. We haven't really run into that yet. And we do have access to multiple printers. And so if one printer really did go down, we would just bring in one of the other printers that we have ourselves and be able to complete the project without too much. But the other part of that is the equipment itself is kind of simple. And there's a lot of complicated work that goes into the back end to figure out how to make this work. But the machinery itself are steel truss systems running off of a G code and printhead running off of a G code. And so the very complicated parts of it where there's risk is material design, building design on the front end. But once it's actually printing, there's not a lot that can go wrong with it on a day-to-day basis. And we do have some delays. The mix we had early in the morning today was a little bit too wet, so we had to kind of move on from that one. There was that's when we do generate a little bit of waste, although we do, when that happens, try to have formwork available that we could actually pour it into and make something else that's useful with that material rather than just dumping it. So there are some small things like that, but that really only represents maybe 90-minute delay in terms of production in any given day. It's not, and in the world of construction, that's pretty inconsequential. There's a lot of delays in construction of legacy methods as well, like without the technology. So, yeah,
100%. Let's talk about some of the projects you've worked on. Tell me about some of the exciting stuff you've done.
Yeah, so we were responsible for the first residentially permitted 3D printed building in Canada. It was a partnership with Habitat for Humanity, the University of Windsor, and it had some funding from CMHC. It was in Leamington, Ontario. It's supportive housing on the site of a youth center down there. So that was incredibly exciting, a huge learning curve to deliver it. It's had people living in it now for about a year and a half, and they've had a fantastic experience as residents of the home. So we're really happy with that. And then after that, we moved into kind of a period of what we called escalating proof of concept. So we moved to doing 2-story buildings and then moved on to a 3-story structure. And now our focus is on scaling production. So we're working with the First Nation. I'm actually out in Alberta right now on the Siksika First Nation. And we're delivering right now a series of 4 prints. Each one of them, again, has 4 units in them, supportive housing for the nation. And because it's the identical structure done again, and again, it is a digital approach to construction. And we've been able to find huge efficiencies and gains in our production capacity by replicating the same design again and again and again. And that really, I think, is one of the underlying sort of promise of the technology is the amount of data we're able to generate in comparison to other forms of construction, and then analyze it and find those areas where we can make improvements and streamline the process and lower the input costs and all of the other stuff you can do when you have a data-driven business. So it's been tremendous to be out here, to be honest.
Amazing. I know one of my board members called me after he saw there was a big thing, I think, a while back on 60 Minutes about a group in the US around 3D printing. And I mean, that got people talking. I'm like, well, we got it right here. We got Nidus3D.
We do.
And so this is growing pretty rapidly, right? Across North America, this technology?
Yeah, and globally, I mean, the sort of estimates out there in terms of the growth of the 3D construction printing market are enormous. I think I've seen CAGRs on it anywhere from 50 all the way up to 100% per year in terms of annualized growth of the industry. I don't know what that is in reality. Those are always the McKinsey studies that kind of point towards market growth, but it is taking off all over the place. And we actually need to catch up in Canada. I mean, Europe's ahead of us on this, and the US is ahead of us on this, and we really need to kind of step up, and because otherwise we're going to be left behind. Like the opportunities for automation and construction are enormous, and we should be leading. Our per capita household or demand for new housing outstrips demand in the US by an incredible margin. We need a vast amount of homes. We don't have the population to deliver them. We need to look at technology.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you couldn't get more agreement here and going forward. Now, here's the other thing, too. When we talk about affordable housing, the other piece to this is when you have a concrete structure. I think Hugh once said to me, he said, if there's a big hurricane, probably the only thing left standing will be these 3D printed homes, right? They're
Yeah.
extremely sturdy when it comes to capital repair over time. You're going to have less, but
Yeah.
also with heating and cooling, it changes the game a little bit, does it not?
It does. We can build to an incredibly high energy performance standard without a lot of increased costs. So we're putting our insulation in between two of the printed concrete veneers, and we're going to have to print those anyway. And we can expand or contract that cavity without a lot of change in cost, which is very unique. If you're trying to do a lot more insulation in a traditional stick frame, you might need, a double set of offset studs so you don't have that thermal bridging and you have enough room for all of that insulation. If you're using spray foam, you can make that a bit narrower. But yeah, we all of our structures so far have met net zero ready standards in terms of their ongoing performance. And now that we can achieve that performance, we've also begun looking at how we can start to reduce the embodied carbon that's actually in the material we use, because we do know that concrete is one of the more polluting substances on Earth. It's responsible for a lot of emissions. But we're so optimized in the placement of the material, and we use not very much of it per building. The structures we're doing right now have about 32 yards, or sorry, cubic meters of material in them. Um, we're so efficient that we can look at some alternatives in terms of our mix design and how we're approaching that to start tackling the embodied carbon that we have. And the cornerstone of what we've been working on right now in terms of that is a graphene based additive, which increases the strength of the material enormously. And when we do increase the strength, we can start pulling out the Portland, which is the most carbon intensive part of the material, and replacing it with low carbon admixtures such as, recycled glass powder, or a byproduct, the waste byproduct from another industry like slag, or other things that are often added into concrete mixes. But so we're working on it, and we'll have some pretty exciting announcements around that in the coming months.
A few years back, probably words that you never thought would be coming out of your mouth when you were in government
Yes.
talking about slag and glass fragments
Yeah.
and mix. But I'm glad you are. This is incredible stuff. What's the future look like for Nidus 3D?
It's all about scaling the technology. We moved, as I said, to this multi print site. It's been a huge improvement in terms of our cost of delivery for a cost per square foot, in terms of finding efficiencies and improving the design and improving the delivery method. And we are really in a place where we're going to be able to scale production to an enormous level very, very rapidly. And so we're really working on building out the partnerships that are going to allow us to do this, working with larger and larger developers, trying to line up projects with more and more units on a single site, aiming at kind of small subdivisions, and then scaling up from there.
Just amazing. If people want to find out more in about Nidus 3D, they want you to come out, quote out a project, get involved, hear more about the technology, where can they go?
Certainly check out our website. It's nidus3d.com. And then on social media, all of our handles are just at nidus3d. We do try and upload as many videos and photos as we can. We tend to be full tilt ahead on production most of the time, so we sometimes don't post as frequently as people would like us to, but there's a lot of cool stuff up there for sure. And then I would also, if you want to check out a little bit of a shout out to another podcast, there's a fellow named Jarek Gross who has a automate construction site. It's called, or blog that called Automate Construction, and he covers the entire 3D printing industry and has some incredible content about where the sector is and where it's going.
Amazing. Well, listen, we're truly grateful that you saw a problem and took action and are doing it in such a cool and innovative and impactful way. I encourage folks, check this out. We've had great interaction with the Nidus 3D team, amazing folks to deal with, very fair, understanding, and really passionate about doing this work. So, Ian, thanks for taking time out of your busy day in Calgary to join us and talk more about this technology.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.